Hi everybody, I'm Skip Elsheimer. Welcome to the AV Geeks Lunchtime streaming show, where we watch old 16mm films and see how things used to be made. I'm not a fan of sardines, I'll tell you right off the bat. Not a fan. I dated someone who used to be, and it was nasty. So, I will certainly eat things that have sardines in them, but yeah. Yeah, so that was part of the Mogul Brothers collection. Mogul Brothers, of course, was a film library that you could rent films from that was based in Manhattan. And many of those films ended up in Pittsburgh at the Oregon Archive. And we have been scanning those over the last couple of years when they bring down some films. So, fascinating stuff. All right, what do we got today? Today is the first day of May. We are getting on a plane later today and going to Portland, Oregon, where we'll be doing a show tomorrow, Tuesday, at the Clinton Street Theater. If you're in Portland, Oregon, come by. What that means is that the tomorrow show is pre-recorded. So, just FYI. Let's learn about how to make electricity from chemicals. Enjoy.
Where does the electricity to run this mixer come from? We can follow the wire and see. It leads where you might expect, to an electric outlet. Lamps get their electricity in the same way. So do some electric trains. But not everything electrical has to be plugged into an outlet for electricity. This portable radio gets electricity from dry cells. This flashlight gets electricity from a nickel-cadmium battery. Electricity for starting this automobile engine comes from a lead storage battery. A lead storage battery, a nickel-cadmium battery, a dry cell. All three produce electricity from chemicals and chemical changes. To understand how, you have to think about electrons, because the story of electricity and chemical changes is really the story of electrons in movement. We can learn something about electrons in movement by thinking about ordinary salt, a simple chemical compound. Salt is made of two elements, sodium and chlorine. To understand what happens when salt is formed, let's think of two atoms, a sodium atom and a chlorine atom. Of course, this is just a diagram. They don't really look like this. When sodium chloride forms, an electron leaves the sodium atom and becomes part of the chlorine atom. The two atoms are changed. They're called ions now. A sodium ion and a chloride ion. Now, whenever anything gains or loses electrons, we say that it becomes charged. The sodium ion has a plus or positive charge. The chloride ion has a minus or negative charge. In a crystal of salt, the sodium and chloride ions are arranged something like these marbles frozen in ice. Chloride ions are larger than sodium ions. Electrons don't move from ion to ion in crystals of salt, but they do in crystals of metals. These marbles represent the arrangement of ions in copper. We can think of metals as made up of positive ions with negative electrons constantly moving among them. Let's see what electrons in metals and salt have to do with electricity. Here we have two strips of metal, copper and zinc. Joined together by copper wires and standing in salt, sodium chloride. This is an electric cell. When the cell produces electricity, the meter will show it. Watch what happens as water is poured into the cell. There, an electric current has begun to flow through the cell. What did the water have to do with it? Well, the salt dissolves in the water. We can represent what's happening like this. In the crystals of salt, the regular arrangement of positive and negative ions is breaking apart. Some of the molecules of the water have also broken apart in the same way into positive and negative ions. In the zinc strip, changes begin taking place. Zinc ions, each with a positive charge, are leaving the strip of zinc and moving out into the water. The electrons that are left behind give the strip of zinc a charge, a negative charge. The positive zinc ions stay close to the negative strip of zinc. You probably know why. Charges that are alike push away from each other. Positive charges push apart. Negative charges push apart. But different or unlike charges pull toward each other. Unlike charges attract each other. So the zinc ions, which are positive, are held close to the strip of zinc, which is negative. At the same time, these positive zinc ions repel other positive ions that come from the salt and the water. These ions are pushed away from the strip of zinc. Some of them are pushed toward the strip of copper and touch it. Remember, electrons are moving through all parts of the copper. These electrons can be transferred. Some of the positive ions that are touching the copper take the exact number of electrons they are missing out of the copper. Now, with the right number of electrons, the ions lose their charges, and we call them atoms again. Because the copper is losing electrons, it takes on a positive charge. So the zinc has a negative charge, and the copper a positive charge. The two strips are called electrodes, and we can see that electricity is being produced. Why? Remember, the wire is made of the metal copper. The wire becomes a path for the extra electrons from the strip of zinc. They are pushed out of the electrode and into the wire. Remember, electrons all have negative charges. So these electrons from the zinc repel the electrons moving freely through the wire. At the same time, as you saw before, the positive ions around the copper electrode attract electrons. This causes electrons to be pulled out of the wire and into the strip of copper. So in this electric cell, there is a push at the negative electrode and a pull at the positive electrode. This push and pull cause billions and billions of electrons in the electrodes and the wire to move in the same general direction. And what do we have? A flow of electrons, an electric current. All cells and batteries that produce electricity from chemicals work in this same way. Now, instead of a strip of zinc for an electrode, suppose we used a piece shaped like this cylinder, and suppose we put the copper electrode inside it. With water and salt in the cell, will electricity be produced? Yes. This is very much the way dry cells are built. Even though we call this a dry cell, it really isn't dry. The chemical inside, ammonium chloride, is moist, like paste. The moisture allows the positive and negative ions of the chemical to move freely through all parts of the cell. At the negative zinc electrode, electrons are pushed into the wire that is attached to it. The positive electrode is made of carbon. Here, electrons are pulled out of the wire and are taken up by the ions in the paste. Dry cells have many uses. But dry cells won't produce electricity forever. As the chemicals inside the dry cells gain and lose electrons, they change. That's what's happened to the dry cells in this flashlight. Their chemicals have changed so much, they no longer can produce electricity. The cells have lost their charge. But there are some electric cells that are designed to be recharged. The cells in this flashlight are rechargeable. To see why plugging them into an electric outlet recharges them, you have to think about electrons in motion again. This is a battery made up of rechargeable cells, a nickel-cadmium battery. Let's look inside it. Like the cells we saw before, a rechargeable cell has metal electrodes. One electrode is made of the metal cadmium. When the cell is charged and operating, this electrode has a negative charge. The other one has a positive charge. It's made of a compound that contains the metal nickel. The electrodes stand in a moist chemical, potassium hydroxide. There are positive and negative ions in this chemical. As the cell produces electricity, the chemicals in it change. After a certain number of hours, they have changed so much that the flow of electrons stops. Now remember, when the cell was producing electricity, electrons flowed out of the negative electrode. Electricity is made to flow into the negative electrode when the cell is recharged. During recharging, electrons are also pulled out of the positive electrode into the wire. Passing an electric current through the cell changes the chemicals in it back to their original form. Then the cell is charged and it can produce electricity again. Rechargeable batteries have many uses. Some even supply enough power to run a small machine, like a hedge trimmer, or provide power for portable lighting equipment. The electrical system of an automobile depends on a lead storage battery, which is also rechargeable. The electricity produced by the battery is used to start the engine. The cells in an automobile storage battery are called wet cells. Electricity is produced only when the electrodes are immersed in a liquid. In this case, the liquid is sulfuric acid and water. Now we can see the separate cells in the battery. In each cell, just as in the other cells we've seen, ions are free to move about. Each time the battery is used, electrons from the negative electrode, which is made of lead, are pushed into the wire. At the same time, electrons are pulled out of the wire by the positive electrode, which is made of a compound containing lead. Each time electricity is taken from the battery, the chemicals inside it change. If the battery is allowed to run down, the chemicals change so much that no electricity can be produced. A lead storage battery, like the nickel-cadmium battery, can be recharged by passing an electric current through it. The electric current changes the chemicals in the battery back to their original form. Then the chemicals in the lead storage battery can produce electricity again, just as chemicals do in nickel-cadmium batteries and dry cells. Electric cells that give us electricity from chemicals.
Love it. Yeah, Cornet, wonderful science series with lots of great animation. I love animation of ions coming together and atoms and all that stuff. And then that kind of weird sparkly. At one point I looked up and was like, oh no, like what is that? That's like a bunch of snow that was during the transfer. I'm like, oh no, those are ions. I get it. All right, so it's May Day. Let's talk about some communist stuff, specifically Soviet stuff. Here's a glimpse of Soviet sciences. This is in no way an endorsement for the current administration in Russia. This is just a look back. Enjoy.
Early morning, on the grass, on the bushes, everywhere tiny dewdrops. Liquids always tend to take the shape of a sphere. The smaller the bubble. Try to blow a soap bubble. You will see that it always tends to a spherical shape. The surface tension is so strong that if you stop blowing into the straw, the bubble will squeeze the air out of itself and contract into a drop. The surface of a body of water is elastic too. Some insects can move quite safely on it. Here is a water skate. Even ordinary objects can turn into marbles in the skillful hands of a juggler. They keep their balance and don't fall down because they rotate very quickly, like a top. The top itself is quite an acrobat. When it spins, one can throw it up, and it will always fall safely on its point. The quick rotation is what makes it so extraordinarily steady. When it loses speed, the top falls over helplessly on its side. This and also how to make it artificially. The Crystal and Graphite Laboratory of the Academy of Sciences of the Soviet Union has perfected scientific methods of producing precious stones for technical use. It turns out the jewels of industry. Under a series of taps from a hammer, the powdered aluminium oxide pours down from the upper part of the apparatus. It is carried along by a stream of oxygen into an oxyhydrogen plane. Here the corundum crystallizes. The crystal grows at a temperature of over 2,000 degrees centigrade. A special cinema technique enables one to watch this very interesting process. In the course of a few hours, the crystal grows to a weight of 200 to 250 carats, a size never found in nature. When the crystals are ready, they are subjected to a very complicated and exact series of operations. Automatic disc-shaped saws divide the crystals into thin layers. They are fixed into special beds and cut into extremely small rubies and sapphires are composed. Produces a gem such as you see here on the screen, enlarged many thousands of times. The production of artificial precious stones for technical use and for jewelry is becoming common in the Soviet Union, thus economizing in imports and strengthening the resources of its industry against the strains of war. Metallization is the name given to the process of covering the surface of an object with a film of red-hot metal. The metal is often heated in a gas flame. A wire of any desired metal is fed into this apparatus, a metallizer. A burning laid even on such inflammable materials as wood, paper, and cloth. The impact of the particles may we see a worn-out crankshaft being repaired by metallization. Grooves are first engraved, and then a layer of metal particles of the desired thickness are laid on. The part is only then to be polished, and it is completely restored. A part repaired by the process of metallization is considerably superior to a new one. The restoration of vital engine parts by this method saves expenditure and labor on new manufacture. They are used for metallization. Metals that rust easily can generally be preserved by a film of zinc. Bars of pig iron stand up better to high temperatures when coated with aluminium. Flaws, scratches, and other defects in machinery At the Young Naturalist Pavilion of the All-Union Exhibition of National Economy, there is a marvelous artificial nestling made by children at Alma-Ata in Central Asia. And artist children put a dummy nestling in the bird box in place of the real one. notice the substitution of the dummy for her own child. Her maternal instinct obliges her to feed the dummy. The artificial nestling enables one to find out what sort of food the mother bird gives to her children, what kinds of insects she destroys. All the insects she brings fall into a glass of formalin. The apparatus works on the same principle as an electric bell. The bird settles on the stick and starts a current by her weight. The current opens the dummy's beak. The mother flies off and the beak shuts. By evening, the children have discovered what the bird uses to feed her nestlings. Look how many insects and their larvae one bird destroys. There are cockchafers, butterflies, caterpillars, and grasshoppers. All of them are enemies of crops, plants, and trees. The starlings, which nest near human houses, guard orchards and fields.
During this compression, the air lost some of its heat. A simple method of liquefying air based on the conversion of the air's heat into work. The machine now used was invented by academician Kapitsa. A tiny turbine replaces the large and cumbersome apparatus. The rotor of this oxygen is used in the most varied branches of industry. Oxygen combines with most other elements with great violence. In metallurgy, the production of a blast furnace can be doubled by substituting oxygen for air. With the aid of oxygen, metals can be cut or melted not only on land but under water. But this wasn't enough. Further complicated apparatus was needed to complete the slow and intricate process of making oxygen. Soviet science does so much work that it cools down at once to the temperature at which it will live.
The work of a furnace operator engaged in forging metals has always been considered one of the most arduous and exhausting. By using a screen of running water, one can greatly relieve the strain of a furnace operator's work. This clever arrangement was designed at the Leningrad Institute of Labor Protection. The water stops 90% of the heat, and the worker no longer suffers from the effects of the furnace. The lump of red-hot metal is dragged out in such a way as not to be damaged by contact with the water. The use of labor protection devices of this kind is one way of increasing output without increase of strain on labor. Of strain. The heat of the furnace taxes the worker's strength and is extremely exhausting.
Has discovered a brilliant
In the spring of 1940, the first passenger sea express was tried out on the Black Sea. The lower part of this sea glider consists of two large boats. The two-boat system makes the glider very steady and greatly reduces rolling when it is underway. The engine rooms are situated in each of the boats. The engine rooms contain two main motors of airplane type developing 675 horsepower. There are also 2 engines of motor car type for low speeds and maneuvering. There is a dashboard with every control needed for the engine. The steering wheel is in the center in front, from where the whole vessel can be controlled. Navigating instruments of the latest type enable the glider to travel at night, even in fog. For the passengers, there are comfortable and roomy cabins, a large lounge, and a pulpit. The glider takes 130 passengers and a crew of 12. Reaches a speed of 50 miles per hour. It can go at this great speed because of the special shape of its hull. The hull has a projection called the redan. As the speed increases, the water, so to speak, thrusts the glider up onto its surface. The glider rises onto the redan so that it skids along the water, and the resistance to its movement is greatly reduced. Here we see the Soviet engineer who designed the sea glider. The Soviet Glider Express is the greatest innovation in passenger shipping in the world. If it hits the target, it generally does so sideways. The impact of such a bullet is not very violent. As a memorial to the Soviet statesman Lenin, the Palace of Soviets is now being constructed in Moscow. This is going to be the tallest building in the world. A giant statue of Lenin will crown the Palace of Soviets. This statue will be 340 feet high. The great 10-story building of the Sovnarkom, the Council of People's Commissars, or Soviet Cabinet in Moscow, is only half as high as Lenin's statue. The Palace of Soviets below it will be 4 times as high as the statue. The palace will be 1,400 feet high. So gigantic a structure can only be made stable by means of a steel frame. The outline of the framework approximates to the contour of the palace. For example, there will not be a single column inside its hall made to hold 20,000 people. From this model, you can see how the weight of the building tends to crush the framework down. So, exceedingly strong and solid rings are added to each series of joints in the framework. These will make the framework stable and durable and preserve its shape. The tower of the palace is to weigh 700,000 tons. This weight will be distributed onto 32 pairs of columns through the lower crossbar rings. Each column is held up by a boot and presses down on it with a force of 15,000 tons. Ordinary steel was not strong enough for the framework, so special steel of greater strength had to be used. At present, some of the steel framework of the palace is being dismantled to provide material for victory. But after victory, the Palace of Soviets will rise again above the capital and be completed.
Yeah, that was a splicey mess, but wow, what a fascinating thing. It is no doubt that that was Soviet propaganda. But the fact that it was narrated by someone, British person, I don't know if he knew that he was I don't know what the deal is. That's probably a very interesting story. Why it was so splicey, I have no idea. It's possible that somebody got it from a source and just clipped together and put together a compilation reel. But visually, man, there's some awesome stuff in there. Really, really awesome shots of manufacturing and of kind of experiments and things like that. It's really very much like that. All right, so let's see. Where do I want to go next? I'm gonna show this film. I don't think I've shown it. It's A Portrait of a Library. It's a longer film, but it's pretty great. It kind of reminds us why libraries are important and why that really hasn't changed for many people. If you don't have a cell phone, or if you don't have, a smartphone, or if you don't have an internet connection, the library can be an important link to the world. But also, it can be a great place to read and to learn stuff. I just was watching the Judy Blume documentary, which I think is on Amazon Prime, of which we provided some stock footage for. And it's pretty great, but it talks about libraries, and it talks about the basic new attack on libraries. And I love libraries. I really do. That's really one of the things when I was a kid, growing up in Albemarle, North Carolina, is we had an awesome library, and I would go there like at least once a week. So here's A Portrait of a Library. Enjoy.
And what, may I ask, is a dear little cupcake like you doing with nasty old school books? My dear child, we haven't had school or books in ages.
No school? Really?
Why don't you get rid of that school book? You can drop them in here.
It'll get all burned up in there.
Well, of course it will, dear child. And so it should. Books tamper with man's basic, natural ignorance. Now, what could be worse than that?
But I can't burn this book. It's school property.
Nonsense! Apple sugar. You just need to get into the mood.
Books are not where it's at, teaching you how to spell cat. I know you'd rather play, so why don't you throw all your books away? Books are made for burning, the fire is already yearning to put an end to any learning.
1, 3, 5, 9, throw 'em in the fire dry.
Put the books in the fire, see the flames growing higher. Burning books is our heart's desire.
2, 4, 6, 8, time to incinerate.
Books will not make you wise, and reading's bad for your eyes. I am sure you agree, so why don't you give all your books to me? Books are made for burning, fire is already yearning to put an end to any learning.
This one here is very good about a man named Robin Hood.
Put the books in the fire, see the flames growing higher. Burning books is our heart's desire.
Though I never liked Tom Sawyer, I won't be a book destroyer.
Books can only confuse, teaching you things you can't use. You should listen to me. Burning your books will set your mind free.
Books are made for burning, fire is already yearning. Put it into any learning. Put the books in the fire, see the flames growing higher. Burning books is our heart's desire. Books are made for burning, fire is already yearning. Put it into any learning. No, stop!
Stop. Yes, it was very predictable why I was going to show this, but so last week we watched 2 or 3 other films in the Unicorn Tales series, of which Magnificent Major is one of those, and none of those have been as nearly as good as Magnificent Major. And is it because there's a Grand Poloni? Is that what it is? In a disco? Is that what it is? I don't know. But that film resonates with me so much more than any of the others. And sadly, it got defeated in the toe tapping tournament. But let's take a quick look. So voting will end Tuesday, tomorrow at midnight. And I won't be able to announce the winner until Thursday because I'll be traveling. But we'll still announce that winner. Those winners, those 4 winners. So it's fast food versus people working with data, zip code song versus good eating, keep the promise versus I'm mad at you, seeing through commercials versus run for your life. If you look on the AV Geeks YouTube page, you will see that the quarterfinals, and you can watch them in an entirety. I'll also show them tomorrow. But if you vote and send your email to skip@avgeeks.com, that will be great. We respect your opinions And from the comments, we know you know what you're talking about. So if you haven't done it yet, please do it. Thanks again for tuning in today. That Portrait of the Library was fascinating. Fascinating film. Silent, but there was a soundtrack added later in a musical score. I have a feeling it was an amateur cinema enthusiast who made it for the benefit of the free library. And, created this narrative and this sense of what it was. It's really kind of an amazing thing. There was an amateur cinema leagues back in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. But fascinating film. Thanks for watching that with me. If you like what you saw, hit the thumbs up button. You can also reward us with some cash via the super thanks button, or you can go to ko-fi.com/avgeeks or patreon.com/avgeeks. Those are other ways you can support us. You can also watch other things that we're showing on our YouTube channel. There's been a lot of ads on there that give us a little bit of money, pennies per view or something like that. But a crazy thing is happening. I should say this real quick. In the last month, about 800,000 people have started watching this film about rabies, and I have generated a great deal of ad revenue from that. And I think I'm probably going to donate maybe half of it to an international rabies foundation, just because the worst thing I have ever seen on film, and sometimes people ask me this, the worst thing I've ever seen, and I've seen a lot of things on film, was children with rabies. And it was absolutely horrible. It was the worst, and it made me feel very bad. And I've also seen footage of men with rabies, and it is horrible thing. If you do not get treated for rabies, it is a horrible life, and it's not a very long life. So anyways, bit of a downer there, but I'm going to take this weird fascination that YouTube has with that rabies film, and I'm going to put it towards a better cause. So there you go. Thanks again. We will see you pre-recorded for the next 2 days. I might try to sneak a live thing depending on what the internet's like, but we'll see what we can do. All right, everybody take care. We'll see you soon. Bye.